Every 4 years, voters supposedly fear one thing or another. In the 2000 elections, people worried about drugs, poverty, and inner-city violence. In the 2004 elections, people worried about the war in Iraq and America's foreign policy. In the 2008 elections, if you listen to certain pollsters at least, voters fear only one thing: really big scary black men. Even if those black men happen to be educated at Harvard, have a white mother, and love to eat their grits with arugula. But black politicians have long been fearful of this so-called Bradley effect, which is when white voters supposedly lie to pollsters saying that they'll vote for a black politician, but then change their mind come election day. Politico ran a story on this on October 7th, when they pointed out that Barack Obama is trying to tamp down racial tensions, particularly in states like Virginia and Michigan, states that have long had racial divides between whites and blacks. And it is because in the last few weeks the race has really tightened up. Many analysts are looking at whether or not white voters are lying to pollsters, and then will go into the ballot box on November 4th and send John McCain into the White House, forcing us to ask a pretty difficult question. Should Democrats fear the Bradley effect come November 4th? And the answer is not at all. First, racial issues have largely been taken off the table. Second, Obama has made significant inroads with white voters over the past few weeks. And finally, the Bradley effect probably doesn't even exist. One of the major reasons that the Democrats shouldn't fear the Bradley effect come November 4th is that the Obama campaign has largely steered clear of racial issues. Some of these issues were brought up on the Los Angeles Times article on September 12th, when they explained that in the 1990s, politicians, particularly black ones, talked about issues like racial equality, racial quotas, and drug violence, inner-city violence, and gang wars. However, black politicians today largely have steered clear of these issues that make white voters fearful of black politicians, because they believe that these politicians will only work for the African American population. The Obama campaign has been particularly adept at steering clear of this divide. According to the Los Angeles Times on September 12th, the Obama campaign has rarely brought up the issue of race, and they hardly ever talk about things like affirmative action, inner-city violence, drugs, or poverty. Instead, the Obama campaign is trying to apply pressure to some of those black fathers who have been negligent in the past, showing the white voters that he's not only going to be working for those black people who he comes from, but also working for white voters throughout the entire United States. So on the whole, the reason that white voters may have changed their mind in the past, if the Bradley effect really exists, is because black politicians like to talk about issues that Jesse Jackson talked about, issues like racial equality, blacks being oppressed, and things like affirmative action. However, in today's political climate, any black politician who succeeds does so by not talking about only black issues, and the Obama campaign knows this, and they haven't brought these issues up, which is why white voters aren't going to be scared of Barack Obama on November 4th, and that means the Bradley effect isn't going to come up. But also, Democrats shouldn't fear the Bradley effect because Obama has done surprisingly well with white voters in the past few weeks. This has to do with one thing: the economy. According to The Economist on September 19th, after the collapse of Lehman Brothers, a major investment bank, America's economy went down the gutter. And largely so far, voters across the political spectrum, even white voters in states like Virginia and Michigan, have viewed Obama as much more competent on the issue of the economy. So, even if white voters initially had reserves about voting for a black politician, come November 4th they're likely going to vote for Senator Obama, because the economy trumps racial issues, because voters overall vote with their pocketbooks. Also, Obama has done surprisingly well in states that once had racial issues, states like Virginia and Michigan. According to the Financial Times on October 3rd, McCain is now pulled out of the state of Michigan, a state he thought he could do well in because white voters and black voters have long clashed over issues like affirmative action back in 2000. In the state of Virginia, however, Obama is running a different game, performing surprisingly well even in rural areas where Republicans typically dominate. This shows that Barack Obama, because of the economy, has been seen as a much more palpable vote for those white voters, particularly in states that had racial divides in the past, meaning that Senator Obama doesn't have to fear the Bradley effect because even racist voters may think twice about not voting for a black politician. Roland Martin, a political analyst, put it in a really easy, simple way. If a black person tries to rob your house in the middle of the night, you're going to call the cops. But if that black person happens to come to your house as a firefighter and your house is on fire, you're going to let him in. Right now the economy is on fire and the entire country is up in flames, and that means that Senator Obama may be acceptable to these white voters who traditionally wouldn't vote for a black man. But also, people really don't have to fear the Bradley effect because the Bradley effect probably doesn't exist at all. It didn't exist in the past. According to the New York Times of yesterday, the Bradley effect was coined for a politician named Tom Bradley, a black man who was ahead in the polls before the November 4th election, but once the election rolled around, the white voters switched their minds and voted for the white politician. However, that probably doesn't explain the true narrative, because even the person who made up the Bradley effect admits today that he was wrong, saying that the reason behind the Bradley effect wasn't that white voters were fearful of a black politician, it just had to do with bad polling, meaning the Democrats shouldn't fear white voters, they should just fear bad pollsters. And even if the Bradley effect did in fact exist in the past, it certainly doesn't exist today, because polling has become much more impersonable. According to the International Herald Tribune of yesterday, polling was once conducted by people close to where you lived. However, pollsters today often live in a different part of the country or aren't even people, they're robots, meaning that you don't have to fear this pollster effect happening because white voters really don't care what people think anymore when it comes to polling, because often it's not a person you know on the other line, it's somebody who you'll never meet again, meaning you're not going to lie to them because you really don't care what they think. You're not ever going to run into them. So on the whole, the Bradley effect didn't exist in the past, and it almost certainly doesn't exist today, which means Democrats really don't have to fear it at all. And so, should Democrats fear the Bradley effect come November 4th? The answer is not at all. First, because the Bradley effect isn't going to matter because white voters are now becoming much more supportive of Barack Obama's campaign. Second, the Bradley effect probably didn't exist in the past, and it certainly doesn't exist today. And finally, the Obama campaign has steered clear of these racial issues.